Okay, so welcome.
Thanks.
We're joined today by Asbjørn Ries Søndergaard. Did I get it right? It's not too bad. Who is the founder of Agenda. And the reason why we're here today is because we wanted to ask you about how businesses are increasingly trying to integrate ESG into their entire business. And you know a lot about that because you work with a lot of small to medium-sized businesses who are doing precisely that. You know, they're looking to go beyond kind of business as usual and actually sort of strive towards their sustainability goals with your help. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you work at Agenda?
Yeah, so Agenda is a PR and communications agency. We are specialized in brand responsibility, ESG, and sustainability, you could say. And this is something that we decided to do many years ago because of the fact that the world really needs more companies to face the challenges of the 21st century and to do communication in a way that is more balanced. And that's why we have an approach called fair branding, which is basically helping companies to have an ongoing open dialogue with shareholders and the rest of society about how they contribute to a more sustainable future and how they see themselves in society, part of a greater, bigger world, and as a company that shares the planet with other fellow human beings.
I thought maybe we should start with some basic explanations about fair branding and sort of ESG in general, if you can kind of help us with those terms.
Yeah, so thanks for having me. I think for us, it's fair branding is a concept that we use. It's our approach to being a PR and communications agency in the 21st century. It's about communicating in a fair and balanced way what you do while walking the talk, making sure to live up to all EU legislations, and also to make sure that you communicate in a way that avoids greenwashing and where you can actually create an honest, trustworthy brand that people want to relate to. So yeah, that's an approach to implementing ESG, SDG, and sustainability into your marketing, into your PR, into your communications. So you make sure that you begin to have this dialogue, as I like to call it, with the rest of the world about who you are and how you see yourself as a part of the problem, but also as a part of the solution for the future. And this is like the overall theme of fair branding, is to communicate the things you do in a way that is aesthetically interesting, inspiring, like PR and communications has to be, so that you can motivate your customers, your suppliers, the rest of society to take part of this sustainable change. And for us, a new way of looking at how you do marketing, how you do communication. Obviously, you want to increase awareness, you want to have a better reputation, you want to have more press mentioning. Everybody wants that. We want to increase sales and drive awareness, but you have to do it in a way where you build a good legacy for your brand, where you are aware consciously about how you affect the world, what impact you have, and that you have a role in society. That's what fair branding is about. ESG is like the newest resort, the newest trend within being responsible as a company, where you have to live up to some EU legislation. We have the CSRD, which is the new Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, where you have 12 sort of criteria you can measure your sustainable impact from, which is within environmental aspects, social aspects, and governance, how you act as a company. And so CSRD and ESG is like a way for a company to actually be very specific about how they have impact on society and on the planet.
Yeah.
And you want to dive into that as a company, not only to, I think we will talk more about that, but not only to sort of show the data that you produce and how you act as a company, but also to use it as a dogma of storytelling, like to inspire change within your company and in the outside world. And ESG is like this new energized agenda that companies can tap into.
It's interesting because I think that if you take ESG, then a lot of the businesses that we're working with, they want to do more than just what you say is the kind of the nuts and bolts, the things that you have to do, that you have to report on, and sort of translating it a little bit more into this kind of the broader approach, which is how are we going to be a responsible company, not just because we have to be, but because we want to be, and we want to inspire all the people that we work with around a common goal. So then it's sort of, how do we tell that story? And I think that that's where you come in, which is so interesting. I mean, it's more than just that, but it's a big part of it, which is sort of translating concepts which are a little bit dry into something which is sort of, how does this relate to our brand? How do we, why is it important for our brand?
It is a very complex agenda, sustainability. I mean, some of the challenges you face as a company in the 21st century is very complex. There's a lot of science in it. There's a lot of data in it. There's a lot of things there's a lot of cultural biases as well. You have the whole wokeism wave. You have a lot of things you need to take care of in an insecure world. And this is where communicating in the right way, in the right balance is very important, where you find that honest but experimenting tone of voice that people can relate to, and where you really get some integrity and some trustworthiness into your brand.
I also want to know a little bit about your story and your journey, because you told me that you've worked in this area for sort of 7+ years, is that right?
Yeah.
And I guess in that time you will have seen huge shifts in the way that businesses are kind of changing the way they operate, because of all of the developments within the reporting space, the effects of climate change, etc. So it'd be great to just hear a little bit about, what your story is and how you work with clients, etc. now.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I don't want to do a big history lecture
nutshell
right now,
style.
but I have to say it's interesting to sort of see the broader perspective, and then I'll elaborate on my own journey. But seeing like how companies have changed the way of approaching the world, the way of sort of looking at yourself as a company the last 20 years, 25 years is amazing. I mean, if you go back like from the beginning of the industrialized process of creating the modern world, companies saw themselves as isolated suppliers of products, somebody who has to deliver a service or a product, and then you make profit and you create growth. Very
transactional.
Exactly.
Like we make it, we sell it, end of story.
Exactly. Yeah. And then slowly, gradually, you've seen that companies created the modern world, right? Companies has a huge impact on society, on the planet. Anything from creating like the technology to transport stuff around the world, shipping, logistics, railway systems, building houses, creating clothes, the clothes that we wear, the interior we have in our houses. Everything is created by companies within the framework of the law. And then slowly, gradually, throughout the 20th century, you see companies becoming more and more aware of how their role is in society and what responsibility they have. And then when the science began to talk about climate change, and you had this Brundtland report in the 1980s, stating the problems with climate change and the biodiversity crisis, then we also saw a reaction towards more responsible approaches within companies and businesses. And this was very, very slow and very, very niche for many years. But entering the 21st century, since the 2000 and the last 25 years, you've just seen a bigger
acceleration.
Yeah, more and more companies do it. They think about, in the beginning it was CSR, corporate social responsibility, very loose, very marketing based.
Yes.
And then we had the SDGs in 2015 with the millennial goals first, and then the SDGs that are more relatable for companies. And then now we have ESG as a new agenda, and the EU legislation that
Yeah.
comes into
It's right around the corner.
exactly. So what we've seen is that more and more companies tap into this, and it is basically a whole new dimension of being a company. You see yourself, as I was talking about before, more holistically, a part of a society, part of a planet. You have an impact, you have a footprint, and you have sort of a responsibility towards what you are a part of. And that is a new way of seeing yourself. You create the world. We always seen companies do that. Meta create the new communication channels of the world with Facebook, and now you have to be more consciously aware about how can you create a better world.
Yeah.
How can you help consumers have better behavioral patterns with regards to climate change, with regards to some of the biggest challenges we see in the 21st century.
We've kind of touched on the business philosophy as in transitioning from kind of just the transactional model, let's say, to a more sort of
being a part of something.
Being part of something bigger.
Acknowledging you are part of the
exactly. So then I guess it's sort of the why. Like, why build a brand which is centered around ESG? Like, what's the benefit for businesses? There's always the kind of the stick and the carrot. So it's like the incentive route versus the kind of if you don't do this, you're going to get fined kind of route. So then the interesting point is what is the biggest incentive for businesses to integrate this into their operations, into the way that they are with their employees, etc.
Yeah.
What's the incentive?
So the basic answer to that question is that being a responsible company and doing ESG and having a sustainability approach is your license to operate in the 21st century. I'd say that there is a moral obligation for a company to be aware of how they affect the planet, because we share the same planet. Off duty and when we are working, it's the same world, it's the same society, it's the same planet. So we've seen this transition that we talked about before, of companies being more aware of the fact that they are part of the problem, but that they also have ideas about ideas about the solution. They both are part of the problem, but they also have the solutions. They can actually change the world. They can see themselves as change makers rather than profit systems.
Yes.
And they can help change the systems that we need to change in order to create a sustainable world. So when you talk about the why are you doing that? I mean, it first of all, it's a license to operate. You get a lot of respect from the outside world in doing it. You have a moral obligation to do it, and then there is also the fact that you just create a lot of energy about your business. I mean, it's an agenda that, if you see it as a business model, it's an investment into the future. So you have to consider it an investment.
Yes.
Some people think, oh, it's not. It's so difficult. It creates so much
extra
overly hours, right?
Yes.
Extra stuff. But it's more like seeing it as a business opportunity, because the challenges we have in the 21st century also requires new solutions. And who comes up with these solutions? Companies, because they are the innovational creators of the world, as we talked about before.
Yeah.
So we can create the future that we want to be a part of. Carlsberg, the Danish company Carlsberg, is a very good example of a company who recognized that they are part of a society, and they always seen themselves as such with the founder story, but now they see it more specifically in the way that they produce what they produce, how they produce it, and they want to make sure that they are very consciously documenting all the data related to their value chains and their production. And why do they do that? They don't just do it because it's the moral right thing to do. That would be naive to say that.
Yes, exactly. I think that's the point. Right? Yeah.
They do it because they see it as a business opportunity. They see it as a way of saying, if we are to attract the talent of the future, generation C and Alpha, they want stability, they want security, because it's an insecure world they grew up in with war and financial crisis, but they also want purpose. So creating a company where you have a very strong purpose gives meaning to your employers. Human beings want to have enjoyment, satisfaction, and meaning. That's what makes us happy, right? In the end, and would some say at least. That's studies that says that. But creating an organization or workplace that stems from that these values is I would say a good future investment.
Yeah.
And obviously also going into to how you produce, to innovate your to innovate the product you have is a way of saying we are the future, right?
Yes.
We want to be part of the future. We want to create the world. So they go actively into their value chain, Carlsberg as a company, and say, let's have an open dialogue with farmers in Denmark about changing the way we do agriculture to become more regenerative. And so they take a responsibility. They could just wait for the change to happen, but they go actively in and say, let's have a dialogue and help them. Let's help creating a more recyclable society where you can actually recycle bottles and use them again, because their product are bottles, right?
Yeah.
So they have ambitions about being 90% recycle, and that is a system in the societies they operate in that needs to be changed.
Yeah.
So it's just to give an example of a company who takes ESG very they're very ambitious on the way they do ESG. They actually look into their scope 3, their value change, to make sure they improve. They have this strategy called Beyond Zero.
Yes.
That's something.
So, i.e., we're going beyond the minimum requirement.
Exactly.
Basically.
But they also go beyond zero because they want to be net zero in 2025 or 2030. But they also want to do more than that. They also want to be regenerative.
Yes.
They move. They push the boundaries all the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes they fail. Sometimes they make mistakes. And what I like about Carlsberg and the way they approach this, seen from the fair branding aspect that we use, is that they only communicate parts of it. They tell the bigger picture, but they don't brag about what they do. They're very humble, and they say we try to do our best. And they didn't succeed with the Snap Pact, which was the glue they put.
Was that the one so that they wouldn't have the plastic?
Exactly. Which was a very good idea. And seen from my perspective, I thought that was great.
So did I. I thought that was brilliant.
And they actually have success in UK by doing it, but the Danish consumers didn't buy it.
They didn't like it.
No, obviously.
Because they put them on their bikes and they have to deal with the cobbles.
I think there's several complex arguments for that.
You know, what I take away from what you're saying about Carlsberg is that they not only see themselves as sort of, see it as a responsibility, but they also see it as a competitive advantage.
Absolutely.
You know, it's like if we don't, if we're not leading from the front on this, then we're just going to lose market share. Yeah. Because people are not just looking for, a beer or whatever else it is. They're also looking for a brand that they sort of really buy into.
Imagine how much energy there is in saying we actually have a bigger purpose than just producing alcohol.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
You have a brand that actually wants to be a part of the future,
yes,
a part of the change, part of society, and do what they can. Not everything, because no company can do everything.
Yes.
But you can start where you have a footprint.
Yes.
And then improve.
Yes.
And that's respectful, and that creates, just passionate employers and a lot of respect about your brand.
Yes.
And a lot of energy. Yeah.
And I think the other thing that I picked up on from what you just said is transparency.
Yeah.
So the idea that, if you're a brand, especially if you're a sort of a large brand, that you sort of have a responsibility to sort of be transparent about how you communicate your ESG, and also to kind of take it on the chin if something hasn't quite worked out. Yeah. Because from a consumer perspective, people really appreciate brands who are honest about their failings. Yeah. Because it shows a sort of human aspect to a brand.
I agree.
Is that right?
Yeah. Because that's also what we try to do with fair branding, is to say you don't have to be perfect all the time. You have to be ambitious, and you have to be dedicated, but you cannot be perfect.
Yes.
and so you might as well just be honest, be more transparent,
Yeah.
be vulnerable whenever it makes sense.
Yes.
Obviously, can be a downside risk to doing that, because you have a lot of you have a market that is responding to whatever you do and say when you communicate.
Kind of in real time, you know, as in it's quite aggressive. It can be.
It can be.
Yeah.
And that can be a risk, obviously.
Yeah.
So that's why it's a balance.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, I'd say that you get more positive feedback from being fair in the way that you talk about your brand and show it, like walk the talk, rather than just saying all sorts of stuff that you want to do.
Yeah.
So I agree completely.
Yeah.
This is the way that you have to communicate if you want to create trustworthiness among the very critical consumers of the future.
What, just out of interest, which brands do you think have got it right? And those could be big brands in terms of walking the talk.
Yeah, so an example could be Carlsberg, as we just spoke about before. A lot of the startup companies and the small, medium-sized companies I work with, they have like ESG as a prism. They sort of consider they want to produce solutions. They don't want to produce products.
Yes.
They see themselves as problem solvers in the world. And I think there's a lot of good cases and companies who really manage to do that very well.
Yeah.
I know it's a difficult market because customers are not really ready to pay the price for a sustainable product yet.
Yeah.
But being responsible and trying to do the best you can and actually work with the footprint you have just gives you a lot of upside in the market. And a good example could be that inspires me. I haven't worked with them, but they inspire me. Could be Vea sneakers, the sneakers brand from I think they're from the Netherlands.
Yeah.
That produce sneaker shoes, not petroleum based, but by a natural rubber. Yeah. And try to actually do it in a big scale. Try to sort of upscale the goods, innovative technological solutions that are more sustainable. And that's what we need.
From start to finish, you know, as in not just talking about it at the end, it's actually looking at, okay, where are the small margins that
and
we
showing
can...
the data and really be very data oriented and see where can we do it. And obviously they are not there yet, because they could also do, I don't know, design for disassembly where you can actually recycle everything and stuff like that.
Take the sneakers apart and actually recycle each part.
And I think Carlsberg want to be that way. They want to be 100% regenerative. They want everything to be recycled, but it takes time to get there. And you cannot expect it to be tomorrow. That's why I mean by fair branding. Instead of saying we are green, we are ready there, you have to see yourself as someone who experiments and try to do your best. And that's, I mean, the companies that are very good at communicating about what they do, they don't brag about it. They don't do a lot of fancy communication.
They're just getting on with work at hand.
Woodwood is a good example. Also, they do focus. They do a CSR report. They do have good values. They do a lot of data tracking, but they don't really communicate being a sustainable brand. And I think that's a very nice way of doing it. Then you can sort of do PR campaigns and communication campaigns when you have specific things to launch
to
a nice new
talk about.
But don't just call yourself a sustainable brand, because they actually very transparently say, we know that we're not sustainable
and we're working in fashion, and we know that's
we'll never be 100% sustainable.
That's an issue.
Maersk just launched 12 new big methanol ferries, tanks that to sort of move the logistic industry towards electrified green transition. Very nice. They're not yet there yet, but they are in the process of doing it. Some of the companies I work with, more specifically, a good example could be Microshade. They do like solar shading of windows in big buildings.
Okay.
They are in the Nordea headquarters. They are in Dansk Industri's rooftop. Okay. They do a small microfiber product that is installed directly into the glazings of windows, and then it protects against the heat and the sun, but you still get a clear view out through it. So it's a very nice technological, innovative product, clean tech, green tech product from Denmark. and they didn't have a green profile. They didn't really know how they impacted the building industry by delivering this product. So I helped them, and Agenda, we helped them in making this green strategic positioning, where they very honestly went into this process of becoming more sustainable, getting an EPD, an environmental product declaration. That is sort of the highest declaration you can have within environment, to focus on how are they impacting the planet, the ESG parameters, how are they creating more well-being among people in buildings, because you get a better indoor climate. You don't have to use air conditioning, you don't have to, because you are protected from the sun. You have a minimum footprint in the production, because you don't have to produce big marquises and big external
Yeah, of
facade
course. So actually, in a
constructions.
way, they're sort of changing the way that buildings are.
Exactly.
An aspect of building construction, right?
Yeah, making it much more easier, making it much more smart. And it's a good example, because now they are next week, I think they are in the Building Green fair, showing where the theme is regenerative building industry, and they are showcasing the products out there. Cool. So that's just an example on something where we took the big transition by going into the strategy, looking at how they communicate and how the product works.
Totally, and almost showing them what is
exactly
a brand that's very highly focused on sort of the technology, etc., and actually showing them, okay, this is how you communicate about this, and this is how your brand is sustainable, basically.
And there's so many low-hanging fruits in companies where you can start, where you can actually say, okay, we are doing something good here. Let's focus on that. Let's emphasize it. Let's improve. And then let's see where we could be better and do the same thing. But
that's then a perfect segue into how do you do it? So we've talked a little bit about why build a brand which is centered around ESG. And I think that the why is great. The how is the most challenging part, because I think, obviously if you're a bigger company, we've talked about the idea that it's much more difficult, it's a huge operation to try and shift. Perhaps if you're a smaller company, there are more opportunities because you are fewer, you have a bit more agency over the types of decisions you're making, and it doesn't require kind of, thousands and thousands of people. But I'm interested to sort of hear, perhaps it would be good for you to sort of just talk us through how you would work with a client from start to finish, and the types of advice you might be giving them along the way.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think it mostly begins in the philosophical area where you try to sort of put words on who you are as a brand. So that's the typical branding process. You start by finding out who you are, what are your values, what is the DNA of your company, where do you come from, where are you now, and where are you going.
And that seems, because I'm sure a lot of businesses go through this process where they have a sort of branding exercises where they have to sort of talk about who they are, etc. But this feels different in the sense of it's much more values based. Yeah,
it is more values based. I mean, all branding is value based, but it's also about positioning psychologically in the market and stuff like that. Who do you want to be? Who do you want to be seen as, and such? And the fair branding approach that we use, it's much more about like meeting the client where they are right now, and then trying to help them think about how they could be a part of the sustainable change, how they could be a part of the responsibility era as a company. Where could you actually start, and how does that reflect your values, who you see yourself as? And then we begin by having the philosophical conversation, motivating, engaging, inspiring, giving them the right knowledge, the right scientific insights, the right sort of experience, and then we help them by producing the very central strategic text, like a core story that is balanced with the 21st century challenges, a DNA description, who they are, where they're going from, where they're heading at, a boilerplate about the company that they are, how they sell themselves in this era.
Yeah.
And then we can dive into the values, we can dive into the mission, the vision. So they get a green print or blueprint.
Yeah.
Green print.
Yes,
Like
yes, I like green print.
Yeah.
That's so much better than a blueprint.
Yeah,
We don't need a blueprint.
No, exactly. So they have a green print on the trajectory from here and the roadmap to the audit to how do they get there.
I'm just interested to know, when you're doing that process with them, do you actually get any insights from the people that work in the organization or people that supply them, to understand how are they perceived in the market?
Yeah.
Do you do any of that sort of due diligence to sort of get the perspectives?
For the bigger projects where there is time and, and a budget to do it, it is definitely recommendable that you do a positioning test in the market to figure out like what is your level of awareness out there and how many people know you and what do they think of you. Like that's a typical branding process. I'd say my expertise and Agenda's expertise is more going directly into how do you consider a strategy within the green field, because the branding process can also be very long and it can be very academic, and there are some other brands agencies that are much better at doing that than we are, but we'll do a bit of it, and then we'll try to figure out what does it take for you to sort of invest in becoming a more sustainable business, and how do you want to communicate tone of voice wise future ahead.
So you've got the green print. The brand has a good sense of their position, let's say, who they are, the values, etc. What's next?
So the next is the challenge, right?
Yes.
This is where it really gets tough.
You're like, oh, I've got this lovely document. What should I do with it?
And that's where I just sneak out of it.
Yeah, exactly. It gets tossed in the bin.
No, it's actually the most interesting process, I'd say. It's the implementation of the strategy of the thoughts you have. And that is a very experimenting phase where you have to step by step build the future as you want to have it. And there's a lot of small steps you can take here before getting to the goal, right? And it's always important to see the broader perspective, but doing it step by step. And obviously, it's a lot about getting the right certificates. It's about doing the data reporting, and there's so many services right now out there that you can use to help you in that phase.
Okay.
So it doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be very time costly. Because for instance, you can use Goodwings, right, to measure your scope 3 emissions very easily, getting into the data. You can use Celsia that helps you measure your data within the ESG, where there are 12, as I told before, 12 criteria. So using these services that is software basically making it much easier to be sustainable is a no-brainer. And the more difficult part is to getting the right certificates. EDP could be a life cycle analysis if that's relevant for your brand. It could be being a B Corp certified brand. That's also quite a long process, but very good.
Yeah, I'm interested just to, we're a B Corp, and we have a lot of B Corp clients, and it's an amazing community to be part of, because it's sort of knowledge sharing, it's all of these things, and everyone is sort of pulling in the same direction. I'm interested just to quickly know from you whether you feel as though B Corp is a worthwhile investment in terms of brand building.
I definitely think it is. I mean, it's the most reliable certificates on the market right now, and it got a very good renommé, a very good reputation, because it's very profound, and it's very, you have to be really doing something to get it.
And they're changing, they're sort of making the, I guess, the criteria more difficult as the years progress. So it's not like once you've got a B Corp, you can sit back and relax and whatever.
And that's the thing about the ESG right now, and the CSRD from the European policy. It's not really that binding. I mean, there's criteria of relevance relating to. So you have to measure yourself. Is this relevant to put into the data? I
see. Okay.
So it makes it a bit more like loose.
For example, if you're software company, it doesn't make sense to file on certain criteria
Exactly,
because they're completely irrelevant
But
to your
that
business.
also opens a door for you being
For
very
getting like a loophole.
Yeah.
Yes.
yeah. So and that could be a new way of greenwashing yourself.
Yes.
So whereas the B Corp is much more like step by step
Yes.
ambitious in that you actually have to walk the talk
Yes.
in many ways, and
Yes.
that's nice because then you believe in it yourself.
Mm.
You believe in the mission. You create energy around it. Your employers become more interested in it. You become much more happy about working for a company that really do all these good things.
Yeah.
But you have to start in the small.
Mm.
So when I talk with my clients about what they can do, it's always very important for me to say that you don't have to do everything.
Yeah.
You don't have
You
to
have to do anything.
You
You're
have
like,
to
oh,
do-
phew. No,
Well,
but that's a really important point because that's sort of part of the issue, right? Businesses, they try to do too much,
Yeah.
and then they end up failing on
Yeah.
everything. So
And
it's sort of small steps.
I think it's a very broad agenda, and the SDGs, there are 17. There are a lot of sub-targets. There are sign-based targets. There are ESG. There's so many things you have to do, but you have to consider that you have values about seeing yourself as a part of the solution, the problem and the solution. You see yourself as a company that is sharing a planet with other human beings.
Yep.
You start looking consciously about where you are operating and take responsibilities there. So specifically where you have impact, you have to have responsibility.
So
Not for everything else,
Yeah.
but for where you act.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to remember on the basis that, you can't do everything,
No.
as we've just talked about. But the idea that it actually, where can you have the most impact?
Yeah.
And that perhaps is for a coffee grower
Yeah.
and producer. It may be that they're having an impact directly where they are producing their coffee with their local communities, putting money back into where they're producing.
Yeah, a
basically.
good example of that is Slow
Yes.
Coffee. I don't know if you know them, but that's
Yes, I do.
it's a coffee company that creates a new business model for farmers, like being co-owners
Yes.
of the coffee
Yeah.
they produce, and they so Slow actually operates in the fields of Laos where the farmers are living. They know them personally.
Yeah.
They help them doing the agricultural in a responsible way, where they also build or plant forest.
Yes.
So the coffee is grown
For the
within this forest.
biodiversity, etc.
Exactly, all
So
that stuff.
protecting those
So
things.
it's a new way of saying we want to own our supply chain. We want to be part
Take
of
more
our supply chain.
responsibility for it,
Exactly.
etc.
Co-creating the company with your suppliers,
Yes.
taking responsibilities all the way down the value chain.
Yeah.
I think that's very inspiring. It's a new business model, and we're gonna see much more of that in the future.
Yes.
Where you
Yes.
try to sort of
Yeah.
be more responsible all the way around the value chain,
Yeah.
even though it's very difficult.
Yeah. So we've talked about the certifications
Mhm.
and the types of things that can help to give you more credibility, let's
Yeah,
say,
yeah,
within
yeah.
the market. But then there are difficulties along the way, which is again where you come in terms of helping businesses to overcome some of these difficulties, which are common. I think it's important to kind of restate that every business goes through challenges during this process. No one is sailing through it without any kind of problems.
Unfortunately.
No, unfortunately not, because of the complexity of the topic. So what are some of the difficulties that you come across when you're working with these businesses?
Yeah, so obviously it's not easy to create change. It's not easy to create a better world because it's a very complex and uncertain world with a lot of risks.
Yes.
But it is very powerful and meaningful to try and to do what you can to become a better, improved version of yourself as a company, also as a human being. But some of the challenges they face oftentimes when I work with clients, for instance with Microshade, where we were getting directly into creating a new strategy alongside a new product that they produced. We had to convince the whole organization, the whole team about this being a very important step. And it is challenging because you have to speak the same language.
Yeah.
You have to have the same knowledge throughout the organization. All employers have to understand that this is not just something we do to get a quick fix
show
of
off
repetition or show off, because
Yeah.
nobody wants to do that.
No.
I mean, it's not about quick marketing. I mean, if you want to do that, then you only play short-term games.
That's it.
And if you're a responsible company, you only play long-term games.
Yeah.
So we want to convince them, and it took time to have that sort of conversation internally to get aligned.
Yeah.
And then there is the hindrance or the difficult thing about saying how much can we communicate outside about what we do and who we are to balance it, to avoid greenwashing.
Cherry picking the things where you're being transparent, you're showing the progress without just saying everything is great, etc., etc.
Yeah, and that's cherry picking, but also like saying what's difficult.
Yes.
And being honest about the process. We really want to do this. We find it so interesting. We really want to be a part of the solution. So here's where we are, and here's where we want to go, and this is what we do, step by step.
And also, to your point earlier, showing that ambition.
Yeah,
I think the ambition is the big part, right?
Yeah.
Which is to say, this is where we want to go. This is who we want to be. And this is what it will take to get here, and there's going to be some bumps along the road.
Exactly. And then invest a lot of time and energy in creating innovation. You have to sort of spend time on finding the good ideas and creating the new solutions, and then when you have them, then test it in the market, and then communicate about that, and also communicate about how difficult it was to get it into the market. I think that's the inspiring part. If you walk the talk, and if you spend every day in the office and in the production hall or wherever you in the value chain, to try to make the improved solutions, and then it can be small things like how do we even like distribute papers within the organization? How do we produce energy? How is our policies regarding people transportation to the office? What is the diet in the canteen? Right, there's so many places where you can try to improve and be the good example, because being a good example as a company, leadership wise, is what creates the positive energy around the agenda.
Yes, I think that's one of the kind of main things, right? If employees see that their senior leaders are really doing it themselves and actually invested in this process, I think that's a big hurdle, right?
Yeah.
If you have an ESG manager within your organization and they feel as though they're constantly coming up against people who really don't want to change their behavior in any way, if they have the support of the senior leadership, it makes it much easier.
Absolutely.
You know?
And again, being honest and being vulnerable as a leader is also very creates a lot of empathy in the organization and a lot of trust.
Yes.
And people want to work for somebody who's passionate, but also knows that they are not perfect.
Yes.
So it's not like saying, now we are green and you have to do this and that and that. But it's also saying, let's try this for a week. Let's see how it goes. Let's start tell this story about where we want to be and who we want to be.
Yeah. And I think that the point that you said, which is around sort of, you don't have to do everything, but also that you can start small.
Yeah.
You can pilot a number of different initiatives and see what lands,
Exactly.
so that people feel as though they're not investing in this huge operational change when actually they could run a couple of tests with smaller groups of people to see how it is, and then take those results and say, okay, was this worthwhile? Was it impactful enough for what we invested in it?
Yeah, exactly.
And should we then roll this out to our other offices or across the organization?
And there's no shame in doing that and then not having success, like business-wise.
Yeah.
Because then that could mean a lot of things. That could mean the market isn't ready for it. The customers want something different. We didn't design it good enough. We didn't label it. I mean, communication and PR and branding is so important, because sustainability can be very good and very smart, but also very unattractive somehow.
Yes.
Can be. Like all products can be that.
In a sense, explain that. How does it seem unattractive sometimes?
Well, why does everyone have an Apple telephone our pockets. Why do we have that?
Mm.
It's because they designed a nice product
Yes.
that you want to, that also have like a bigger branding identity you want to be a part of, right? Because it's cool, it's attractive, it hit the right spot whenever they entered the markets, right? And still growing.
Yeah.
So how do you label sustainability and sustainable products in an aesthetically interesting and attractive way that hits the spot of the consumers? That's the difficult.
That's
creative part.
the
But
million dollar question.
Exactly, and seen from a creative perspective, this is what we try to do. This is what we try to help, doing the tone of voice, doing the copywriting, doing the text in a way
The
that
storytelling.
yeah, because it is about storytelling. But we also have had economy where symbolism is very important and almost everything. And now I think we're entering into a new phase where the symbols have to be sort of rooted in reality somehow.
Explain that a bit more about symbols.
So that's fair branding again. Like symbols is what drives a world, right? Branding is about symbols. It's about being a part of the culture, being a part of a movement. It's about finding identity, belonging, a sense of belonging, and we want to create a good brand about the sustainable movement, so that people wants to belong to that. So that we change our behavioral patterns toward more sustainability. And that's the creative task that we try to work with as a company, in partnerships with other companies, obviously our clients. And it is about storytelling, as you say, and it's about figuring out how to balance it in a way that is not like too overwhelming or too far away from because we also want to be free, we also want to be ourselves, we want to be humans. We cannot be responsible all the time in everything we do.
Yes, and for every issue, etc.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's about acknowledging that it's there. We face these challenges as human beings, as companies, and then little by little start by doing having some good values that leads you to doing the right things in the world.
Rising to the challenge.
Exactly. If I were to give some advice on somebody who wants to go into this field, I will always say, try to think big, but act present.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great. So basically, ambition is important, but also rooted in reality as well.
Yeah, and in the now, and what
and
you
in
can
the
do
now.
right here,
Exactly.
and where you operate.
What could I do today?
Yeah, that's the basically.
Start right here. Yeah.
And also because you have to acknowledge that it's so difficult for big companies like the big corporations to change the whole value chain, right? If you have to track scope 3 emissions in the whole value chain, the entire value chain, as a big company like Maersk or Carlsberg, that is tricky because you operate in so many different countries, so many different cultures, so many different people. So you have to start.
Except business
small.
travel, of course, which is.
But that's a good example. What
it's
you
a
can
really
use,
good
right?
example.
Then it's easy. You use Goodwings, then you have your business travel measured.
I think that.
But that's just a part of
that. Exactly. Right? So I mean, I think that's the thing. That's about what can I do today?
Yeah.
Right. Which is like, I have control over this. I don't have control over all of this, but that will come with the types of things that you say, which is investing in your value chain basically, and trying to make changes to how you operate there. But I think, as you say, it's what can I do now? What can I do in the present? Whilst also still being ambitious. Yeah,
and that's, I mean, to sum it up, it is to sort of start by having it in your heart, sustainability and responsibility, so that you have the philosophy and that you believe in it, and that you actually feel that you become more happy as an organization. Companies become more happy from having these values.
Yes.
And you have a good future ahead of you where you can be a part of this movement, and then start by implementing it in the small details. When you have travel costs, then you can use Goodwings to measure your data. That's one step.
Yes. Or your business operations, your electricity, etc. Small changes within your organization is a great place to start. Exactly.
Innovate labeling, packaging. Innovate. Do a lot of partnerships. I think that's so important to do partnerships with other companies about co-creating a society that entirely
knowledge sharing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Instead of competing all the time, also do that.
Yeah.
I think it's in that sense responsibility and ESG is a competitive advantage in the future, something you differentiate yourself as a brand, but it's also something that we do together.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here today and for sharing your knowledge. It's been super interesting, and I hope everyone has taken something away from this today. I certainly have. And yeah, thanks again.